Welcome to History Secrets Uncovered. My name is Jay Chandarana, and today I'm joined by Professor Mary Kathryn Barbier, a history of the Second World War and a professor of history at Mississippi State University. Professor Barbier's research explores the complex world of warfare, intelligence, and strategy from the front lines of battle to the secrets of espionage as well. In this episode specifically, we'll uncover the secret side of World War II, the spies, double agents, and intelligence networks that shaped the outcome of the war. We'll also dive into the moral gray areas of deception, overlooked contributions of women in espionage, and the ethical questions that continue to change and challenge how we think about war and information today. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to help to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, I'm excited. And first, what first drew you in to this hidden world of wartime espionage and intelligence history?
So I would say that the seeds of having an interest in World War II history goes back to my father, who grew up during the war, and I grew up hearing stories about his cousin who didn't come back, about him being in high school and seeing U.S. naval vessels going up the Mississippi River to get repaired at Avondale shipyards because they had been tangling with German U-boats in the Gulf of Mexico. And then we watched movies that were produced during the war and right after the war. So I grew up learning about aspects of this conflict. And so that was something I wanted to pursue when I decided to go back and work on my PhD. And then things took a turn because of my dissertation research. I went to my advisor for help in coming up with a topic, and he suggested two things and said, go off and do some reading and come back and tell me what you want to do. And one of the topics had to do with aircraft, and I am not a science and tech
Yeah,
person. And so I was like, yeah, no, that doesn't appeal to me at all. And the other was to look into a deception plan related to the Normandy invasion. And I started doing some digging, and that piqued my interest. Um, and in the course of my research, I came across several double agents who worked primarily with the British, but who were involved with some deception plans that were implemented by the US and the British together.
that's interesting. Wow. And kind of starting to talk about this, in your work, Kursk, the greatest tank battle ever fought, 1943, you describe massive battlefield operations. And in another one of your works, Spies, Lies, and Citizenship, you speak to almost like a shadow of war and deception and counterintelligence. How do you see these two sides of the war, of open combat and covert strategy, kind of shaping one another?
Well, that's a good question. Some would argue that military intelligence can enhance the possibility of success in open combat. If one side knows with a great deal of certainty what the opponent is planning offensively, then that side can prepare suitable defenses to thwart the enemy as well as a viable plan for a counterattack. Um, I think you can find examples throughout history of military units relying upon intelligence about the enemy. During the American Civil War, they used balloons to fly over enemy lines to try and get information about how the enemy was displayed. You see aircraft used for the first time in a reconnaissance role, or in any role in the military in the First World War,
Yeah.
to try and get information about the deployment of troops. What's the enemy's strength? Does it look like the enemy is amassing forces in a given place? And how can you use that information? But kind of hand in hand with that is some military leaders' reluctance to accept and act on this intelligence because weren't collecting it themselves. When you have the creation of intelligence agencies, and then military commanders don't necessarily trust the information that's being forwarded to them because they didn't oversee the collection of that information themselves. And it takes a while for military forces to become comfortable accepting and using the intelligence that is gathered by another separate entity that has nothing else to do with the military.
Do we see instances of tensions arising because of this,
Yeah.
where like spy organizations and military organizations are often at odds with one another because of this?
Yeah, and you see normally there's tensions between different branches of the military. Well, there are also tensions between different branches of intelligence agencies because not all intelligence agencies do the same thing.
Got it. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Um, and more on one of these spies, your work on double agent Sergiu, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is super interesting. Who is she, and what did her story reveal to you about the challenges and contradictions faced by women working in espionage during World War II?
So Lily Sergeyev was born in Russia, and her family fled Russia during the Russian Revolution, and they eventually settled in Paris. So she grew up in Paris and embraced France as her home. In the mid to late 1930s, she embarked on a career as a travel writer. And so she traveled across Europe, taking photographs and talking to local people and then writing articles. She was a freelance journalist for some newspapers, and then she compiled a couple of books that were published before the war broke out. And on one of those trips, she was going to travel from Paris down Europe, through Europe, down through the Middle East, and then head east. And her ultimate goal was to wind up, I think, in Saigon or someplace like that. And she got stuck in Beirut when the war broke out.
Mm,
And she did some training as a nurse. She worked briefly as a nurse and decided that wasn't for her. What she really wanted to do was to get back to the action and to be part of the French who got rid of the Germans. She didn't want to
hmm
be part of the resistance, excuse me, but she wanted to um, help whatever side was fighting against the Germans to get the Germans out of France.
Got it. Yeah.
And so you asked about contradictions, and that's an interesting question. Um, there have been women throughout history who have ventured into what we would have traditionally called the male space. Whether it was they disguised themselves as men and went off to fight, or they were involved in the secret world of intelligence gathering for one side or the other. Um, in the 20th century, the person who seemed to get the most attention and sort of set up the stereotype for women in intelligence was Mata Hari, who was not what you would call a typical spy. Because when we think about spies, most of them try to operate behind the scenes and not be noticed. And Mata Hari was a dancer. She was an exotic dancer who slept her way across Europe in many respects and gathered intelligence. And it's not clear if she really was a spy. And if she was, who was she working for? Was she an agent, double agent, whatever? But at the end of the day, she gets arrested by the French and accused of espionage and is executed. And so when we think about women spies in the 20th century, she's the person who comes to mind most often. Um, Lily was not like Mata Hari in some respects, but in other respects, she was. She was a confident woman who dressed stylishly. She
hmm
um, decided what she was going to do and how she was going to do it, and she embarked on those adventures with a determination that was I think, took many men by surprise.
Yeah.
Um, but she went about um, what she did in the Second World War by understanding that um, the best way to approach this was to pretend to work for the Germans and then find a way to actually work against them, so to become a double agent. And there were a
Yeah.
couple of men who did the same thing. Um, I'm still trying to parse out all the differences between how women were treated in these roles versus how men were treated.
Hmm.
Um, it took Lily almost 2 years between when she first approached the Germans and she actually made it to England. And in that time, she went through intermittent training. And I haven't gotten the sense that the men went through the same sort of training. Um,
So almost like a gender kind of thing where like just the training that Lily had to go through was more intensive, more extreme, um, than what a man would have to go through.
yes, I think you're right. It was also intermittent. Like she didn't train every day. And
Ah,
German
okay.
handler, was not the most competent at his job.
Hmm.
Um, and he was scatterbrained. He was always late for appointments. Sometimes he didn't show up at all. And she couldn't just go from Paris to London without having the proper paperwork. And so she went back and forth between occupied France, so Paris, into the Vichy France to try and get her documentation. And her handler would send her down there, and she'd go to meet with a person who was going to give her the documents she needed, and that person would be on vacation. So there were a lot of missteps
Hmm.
between when he became her handler and by the time she actually got to London. So she first approached the Germans in late December of 1940.
Mm, got it. Yeah.
She didn't make it to London until late October, early November 1943.
Oh wow. So almost 3 years then.
Yeah. And so when she finally got the paperwork to leave France and make it to Madrid, Spain, she was supposed to then acquire another visa to get from there to Lisbon, Portugal, and go from there to England.
Mm.
Well, she couldn't get the visa to Portugal.
Oh, just because of the same
And
handler as well, or
she's still working with the same German guy
yeah.
who comes to meet her in Madrid. But in the meantime, she had approached um, British intelligence, and they were trying to help her organize the rest of her trip. She decided to go through Gibraltar. But the complicating factor is she brought her dog with her, and she wanted to bring her dog with her to England with her. But the British had really strict quarantine laws.
Mm. Yeah.
She had to leave the dog in Gibraltar. And she tried to get some American servicemen, pilots to bring the dog. Then there was somebody else who promised to bring the dog. The upshot was that the dog stayed in Gibraltar, and eventually, um, I, the story's not clear about how the dog got out, ran into a street, got hit by a car, the dog got killed, and nobody tells her because they don't want to upset her about the fact that she doesn't, that her dog's dead.
Yeah.
At the same time, she's starting to distrust him because she's had some people promise to help and then they don't follow through on that.
Yeah.
So, and there are so many other interesting aspects. Like also been trying to figure out how the pay scale was different between the men and the women, and not so much from the German end of things, but how the British handled stuff. Because the idea was that once somebody agreed to work for the British, whatever money the Germans sent got turned over to the British. And at least one male double agent who was a businessman said he didn't need anything from the British payment wise except expenses.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? Well, they put Lily up in an apartment, gave her a monthly stipend, but from that monthly stipend, they withdrew rent, they withdrew utilities. She had to pay for her transportation to go from the apartment to where she was actually working. And by the time several months goes by, she was so frustrated because she said she was actually paying the British to work for them, that she was actually short every month from between what they paid her and what she had to spend for
Huh,
her living
okay. Yeah.
expenses. And so I'm not sure if that was the same for the men or not. I haven't been able to find that yet. But
Got
that
it.
would be
Yeah.
another way to show the difference between not only how the Germans treated women versus men, but how the British treated women versus men.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know earlier we were speaking about contradictions. In today's world, espionage and spies often get really romanticized. But
Yeah.
in your research, what have you found about the actual emotional and psychological toll of this work? Were agents ever conflicted by the secrecy or deception that was required?
Okay, well, I can give you an example that might be kind of indicative from what many Asians experienced. Um, Lily Sergeyev had some health issues that were made worse by the stress of her journey to England um, because she was constantly in danger if she made the wrong moves. Then you have her handler saying, "Well, we know that you're going to do what you're supposed to do because if not, we'll take it out on your family." So she's got that other threat. And so she was in constant danger of what the consequences would be if she made the wrong move. So from the very beginning, her relationship with the British was off to a rocky start, which didn't help. And she hadn't been working with the British for very long before she was sidelined with a really serious health issue. She was in the hospital. Surgery was recommended. She didn't want surgery. And it took her, and then to really start working and transmitting messages to the Germans. March, April, June of 1944, when she had another bout of health issues, she realized that the British didn't need her to continue communicating with the Germans, and that upset her. And so she made some poor decisions that ultimately resulted in the British parting ways with her
Yeah,
because they didn't think they could trust her. So the stress of the work that she was doing, the whole umbrella of everything that she was doing, combined with her health issues to influence what she did and when she did it.
got it. Yeah, thank you for that.